What's up, everybody? How's it going? Welcome back to the channel. People love to criticize Geeta as being one of the worst champions, in no small part because she has one of the best lead Pokemon in the game and leaves it for her ace. Of course, today we're talking about Glimmora. But how good would Glimmora really be as a lead-off Pokemon? Well, it's established itself as a major meta threat in VGC, and today I wanted to sort of talk through the brief history of Glimmora and how it's evolved from San Diego to now. The 2023 season started off at the San Diego Regional back in January, won of course by Jisuk Lee and his Garganacl-backed Excalibur team. Another team that took the event by storm, though, was Emilio Forbes' Glimmora Dondozo squad, which finished top 8 but also went 10-0 in Day 1 Swiss. Looking at the other teams that we see here, there's no other Glimmoras in the top 16, so this was a departure from the standard meta and a Pokemon that very few people were prepared for going into the event. It was a really interesting take on the otherwise popular Dondozo Tatsugiri core, and the way this Glimmora worked was essentially by slapping choice specs on the Pokemon. Emilio forced the opponents to make an immediate choice turn number 1. Do you want to leave the Glimmora alone and let it just fire off choice specs moves left and right, making it very easy for the Dondozo Tatsugiri to clean up in the endgame? Or do you want to hit the Glimmora and set up toxic spikes, making it really easy for the Dondozo and the Tatsugiri in the endgame? It was very much a rock and a hard place type of deal for teams that just didn't really have a lot to deal with the Glimmora. This Glimmora also had Earth Power, which, along with the choice specs, allowed it to naturally counter Golden Go, which is a Pokemon that theoretically could have caused a few problems. Glimmora is 2 speed faster than Golden Go, so with the max speed on this beast, it was able to just not really care that Make It Rain could get rid of it without setting up the toxic spikes. With the many coverage options that Glimmora has access to, in this case, Rock, Poison, Ground, and Fairy, there's not really a realistic scenario where the opponent could just leave the Glimmora alone. And at this point in time, the format was very focused on physical attackers, Pokemon like Meowscarada, even things like Mimikyu, Excalibur did really well at this tournament. So, if you were attacking the Glimmora, you were most likely going to be setting up those toxic spikes. Dondozo, with the Commander boost boosting up both its defense and special defense, and also with Protect and Leftovers allowing for it to regenerate HP over time, would really be able to take advantage of that poison damage to just chip down the Pokemon a little bit until Dondozo's Earthquake could just tear through the remaining Pokemon. Part of what made Emilio's team so scary at San Diego was that a lot of people were just not ready for Glimmora. Eventually, though, he would fall in the top 8 in a Dondozo versus Dondozo match against Chuppa Cross. Chuppa's Dondozo was a rest variation, so even if it got poisoned by the toxic spikes coming in, it was just very easy to rest away the poison, and it was just kind of a natural counter. Jisuk Lee's team also had an answer to it with his Terra Poison Garganacl. This would allow the Poison Garganacl to switch back in and take away the toxic spikes from his side of the field. So, while this was a really cool team, it didn't really catch on, and the meta trends kind of looked like it was going to leave behind Glimdozo. Series 2 brought us the Paradox Pokemon and a lot of massive meta shifts. One thing that stayed the same, though, is that nobody believed in Glimmora except for Emilio Forbes. No longer Glimdozo, this was a completely different team, and once again Emilio rolled up with a very similar Glimmora, once again, choice specs, and this time went 10-0 in Swiss, before ultimately falling in the top 8. This was a really interesting approach to the Glimmora team, because while the Glimmora stayed the same, the rest of the Pokemon played it very differently. The Dondozo had the option to kind of slow the game down, try to stall it out with Leftovers, Protect, and its immense bulk paired with the Toxic Debris, whereas this team had a lot of Pokemon that did a lot of damage, but Pokemon like Bundle, Pokemon like Fluttermane, Pokemon like Kingambit, a lot of the time are doing big damage, but not necessarily getting one at KOs. The Fluttermane doesn't even have Moonblast, so its strongest move is Shadow Ball, which is only 80 base power. The Glimmora's role here, once again, is to take big damage with its choice specs, and if you hit it, well, all of a sudden those toxic spikes are putting you from very healthy to just barely in range for all of these pretty strong moves to pick you off. It was a really good way for Emilio to roll through Swiss before eventually falling once again in the top 8. Partially inspired by Emilio's Orlando run, we saw a pretty notable uptick in Glimmora usage going into the Oceania International Championships. While no Glimmoras were present in the top 8, a number of them were present in Day 2 of Swiss. Alex Underhill managed to finish 9th with the same 6 Pokemon, albeit with a couple of different sets, and Joe Ugarte finished 15th with a pretty similar team as well. Both of these teams leaned heavily on Glimmora's choice specs variation. But maybe the most important one going forward for the meta was the 19th place team run by Yuki Zaninovich. Yuki's team was a return to the Glimmora Dondozo Tatsugiri core, but unlike Emilio's San Diego team, Yuki's Glimmora had no real explosive offense. Instead, it was fully bulked up, and it was focused heavily on the poisoning aspect of the game. Mortal Spin is a spread move that allowed Glimmora to poison both of the opposing Pokemon if they decided not to try to remove the Glimmora. But once again, if you remove the Glimmora, chances were you were going to be setting up Toxic Spikes on your side of the field, which would make it very easy for the Dondozo in the back. Yuki's Dondozo was also the substitute Protect variant, making it even more easy for him to stall out additional turns and rack up that poison damage. Glimmora was so central to Yuki's game plan that on multiple occasions we saw him lead Glimmora next to Talonflame and use Talonflame's Gale Wings ability to give him a priority Brave Bird into himself, hitting his own Glimmora to set up the Toxic Spikes, allowing him to stall out the game with that poison win condition. Following the Oceania International Championships, there was only 1 week until the next major event, the regional in Knoxville. Now, 1 week's not exactly a lot of time for the meta to develop, and Knoxville was notable for being a tournament where really weird stuff was just kinda everywhere and did really well. I made a whole video on that, so go check that out if that sounds interesting. But there was one player who took Glimmora Dondozo and almost made it into the top 16. Marcus Dion finished 17th with his own take on the Glimmora Dondozo core. Basically, what he did was he took Chupa Cross's team and slotted the Glimmora in over the Golden Go. Marcus's Glimmora found a happy middle between the aggressive Choice Specs variant and the super full bulk Toxic Spike Spiky Shield variant that Yuki was running, and it had an Assault Vest. The Assault Vest, of course, forced it to run only attacking moves, but Mortal Spin is technically also an attacking move. It's just very, very low base power. Marcus was able to invest a reasonable amount of EVs into special attack to keep it offensively threatening, while using that Assault Vest to make it bulky enough to take hits like Choice Specs Make It Rain, that otherwise would be able to remove the Glimmora without actually setting up the Toxic Spikes. Marcus made his own video report about this team and about this run, so definitely go check that out. I'm gonna link it in the description below, so go give him some love. But one thing that he mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, is that across 14 best of 3s, Glimmora was a lead in 100% of his games. It was the pivotal part of his game plan, and I think that, if nothing else, illustrates just how central Glimmora has become to this core. And that leads us to modern day. As of the recording of this video, the most recent major tournament is the Vancouver Regional. In the top 8, you could see that Zachary Thornburg, while running his own patented Psych-Up Sylveon Dondozo core, also slotted in a Glimmora to have that extra mode. Neil also finished in the top cut with Glimdozo, Marcus Dion finished top 16 with his own Glimdozo, and Freezeye also ran Glimdozo in Day 2. A couple of other big-name players also ran Glimmora Dondozo, like Raghav Malavia, who got top 64 with his take on the core. On top of that, a lot of the players who were running Glimmora Dondozo were featured very heavily on the stream, meaning that there's more data than ever out there for other players who might want to learn how to play the archetype to study. There are 2 more events left in the format, with the Utrecht special event this coming weekend and the Charlotte Regional the weekend after. If you're going to either of those events, you really need to make sure that you have a game plan into Glimmora Dondozo. I expect it to be more popular than ever, and I think it's going to be likely that a decent number of teams in Day 2 of both of those events will be Glimmora Dondozo teams. It's a really, really difficult team to build against, and a lot of the weaknesses of the Dondozo core are covered by the Glimmora version of the team. So it makes it really, really difficult to plan for while still keeping your game plans alive for the other versions of Dondozo, things like the Flamigo version. It's a really interesting shift to the meta. It makes team building way more difficult for these final events, so make sure that you're prepared. And Gita, if you're out there, maybe you should try moving Glimmora to the front of your party instead of the back. You too might be able to have some real success as a competitive Pokemon player. I hope you're all having a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night, whatever it is, wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you guys next time.